Bush. He's one of our longtime members, and he did a lot of the mapping for a cave named Precinct 11. In April of 1983, there was a pretty major flood event that trapped some of his trip members into the cave, and Gary's going to tell us a little bit about the mapping project and that particular cave rescue. So I'm going to hand it over to Gary to give us that presentation.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie. If you can't hear me or any issue comes up like that, be sure and tell me early. Don't wait till I talk to nothing or nobody. I'm always glad to talk about Precinct 11. Things have slowed down with going into there. We completed the mapping in as far as we are. You can complete a cave that's 5.5 miles long. I'm sure there's more passage in there simply because of the volume and size of the cave. But we completed that in the summer of 1985. So going back to some brief history, we had, in late 70s, we had hiked up and down Crooked Creek. We had already completed the mapping of Arthur Singleton's cave and Cooksburg School Cave, and we were beginning the mapping of a Highwater Cave, which is further down Crooked Creek. If anyone is not familiar with it, it's further down Crooked Creek from Arthur Singleton's. It's right about where Poplar Gap Road meets the Crooked Creek Road, or the Goochland Road, depending on how you call it. Right along Crooked Creek, right? It's right at Crooked Creek. So we decided to go up the creek. Of course, everyone at the time knew about, and they had completed most of the mapping of Goochland Cave, which is 1.5 miles or at least 1.5 miles, maybe 2 miles further up Crooked Creek, further north from Arthur Singleton's. So we were walking, we hiked along and did bridge walking. Only we weren't on the ridge, we were down in the creek, up and down Crooked Creek. And because we knew there were other cave passages along there. And we did find the opening for Precinct, what later became Precinct 11 Cave. And we stuck our heads in there, and it was a low and wet cave. All you see was a big pool of water inside. And we said, well, we can do that some other time. We weren't in caving clothes. And so we put it on our list. And we've walked further up and down along Crooked Creek and found some other holes. And we also walked up Barnett Valley a little bit. And there were a few small holes along there too. So later that spring, we had a trip to Endless Cave. Endless Cave was also known as Singleton's Cave, not to be confused with Arthur Singleton's. It's named after Sherman Singleton, who owned the property. He was a farmer that owned the property further down Crooked Creek Road toward 1004. Nice family, nice fellow. And he had invited us to stop in, and after we get out of his cave, out of Endless Cave, which is a nice cave. It has lots of gypsum in it. It's a very pretty thing. It's across the creek from his house, or what used to be his house. He invited us in, and there were about 5 of us, I guess, had been in Endless, and he invited us to come and have some watermelon out of his garden. And we sat around and talked for a while. And his son, Arthur, was there, who actually goes by his initials AL. And he was telling us about the Arthur Singleton's Cave, where he used to play as a kid. Hence, we later named it Arthur Singleton's in his honor. But he also, we mentioned that we had found the bigger entrance further up the creek, and it had it was full of water. And he says, yeah, he said that cave drains all of, it has to drain all of Barnett Valley. Now, Barnett Valley spurs off to the northeast from Crooked Creek, and it's about 3.5, 4 mile long valley, and it runs up, and anything that drains that whole valley is going to be a lot of water. And he said at times when there was a heavy rainfall that covered the whole area for any length of time, a volume of water would come spewing out of the entrance of what is now P11. And he said it would just be like a roaring cascade that would just come pouring out and run into Crooked Creek. And he says it has to drain that whole Barnett Valley. So we said, yeah, we had found that entrance, but we didn't think much of it. So later that summer, actually on the 22nd of June, we made it a point to go and check it out. And there were 6 of us, I believe, on the first trip to go into the cave. We brought our survey gear. We planned to start surveying from the entrance as we went into the cave. But when you got down low and looked into that pool of water, you could see a mud slope on the other side of the pool went about 20, 25 feet. And then on the far side of it, you could see a mud slope, and it looked like darkness on the other side, as though you would just only go through that little pool of water and be right out and going into the cave. So I climbed in and went across the pool, and it wasn't that way. It was a blank wall on the other side. But there were 2 passages, one to the left and one to the right, that went out of the far end of that pool. And a couple of the others came in, I think Dennis and Shelley Page and a couple others came into the pool with me. In the summertime, it's a nice cool pool. Of course, it's at 55 degrees, and it was a nice hot summer day, so it's pretty chilly getting into that water. Always is. And it's a stoop. You can't stand up straight when you're in the pool of water. The whole passage from rock bottom or sandy bottom to the ceiling is only about 4 feet high, and it's only about half full of water. So you've got about a good 2 feet air. So I've got some pictures I'll show you. So we got in there and we looked, and the passages that go to the left and right, almost immediately the ceiling drops down almost to the water. The one on the right, you had maybe 5.5 inches of airspace. And the one on the left, you had less, about 4 inches of airspace. And it's blowing air like crazy out of both sides. I mean, blowing, a wind type blowing. So as uncomfortable as it looked, we decided, okay, we'll go in. And I said, oh, I'll get wet first. And let me go in and see if there's anything here before you all come in and get wet. So that's what I did. I went through the right-hand side that had an extra 1.5 inches airspace. And after about 75 feet, it came up again to about the same size as the entrance pool room that I just left. And but it was a junction room. There were 3 passages going left, right, and center. The center one you could see was a sump. It was a pool of water, and it sumped out. The left and right didn't know where they went. So I tried the left one, and it was a nice sandy crawl in a little tube, it's probably 5 feet in diameter, something like that. I crawled around that crawl around, and I came back into the pool of water. Only I could hear the group talking back in the main entrance pool. I was upstream from them on the other side of that ear dip, or well, what we later started calling it the brain dip. Jack Hissong did anyway, because it had 1.5 inches less airspace. So it was obviously a cut around. And I said, well, let me run upstream a little bit to make sure this thing is going and it's not a real low whatever. And then I'll come right back. and then we can start surveying up. So that's what I did. And as I started crawling, crawling in and out of pools of water, and the ceiling slowly started going up. It was generally about a stoop walk sized passage that had pools of water, and you'd go into pools. The stream was coming down, and the gravel would impound water into pools, and then you'd get a little cascade, and you'd get to another pool, and that's the way it went. And so I said, I'll be gone 5 minutes, 10 at the most, and then we'll come back. And if there's anything there, we'll go into the cave. Well, I was probably gone a little longer than that because I still wasn't sure if it was going to peter out. And so I finally got up into a breakdown room that had big flat rocks in it. And I said, this is a pretty good sized cave. I better go back. And so I headed back to the group, the rest of the group who were waiting for me in the entrance pool or at the entrance. And so I was going merrily along, splishing and splashing in and out of pools of water. And I finally got back to the pool, and they were wondering where I had gone because I was gone more than my 5 or 10 minutes. And I said, hey, guys, get the gear, let's go. This is a going cave. And so we started surveying. And we probably spent the first day, that first survey, we were in there a good 12 or 14 hours. And as you'll see from the data that I'll show you on the chart of each of the trips, we put in almost a mile passage. Because what happened is as you went upstream in about 1,300 feet, a quarter mile or so from the entrance, you pop out from under a ledge into Trunk Passage. Starts out at 15 feet high, and pretty soon it's 40 feet high. And you're walking in big Vados Passage, a large trunk passage, and it continues all that way. Occasionally the ceiling will come down, but then it'll go back up. And it continued through up the stream passage all the way until we got into what we called the big room, which was a pretty good sized room, 60-foot high ceiling almost. And it kind of went left and right, big breakdown piles. We climbed up to the top and we measured, there was domes on one side. It was pretty impressive at this point. And so we put in just about 9/10 of a mile of passage that first day of mapped passage. And so let me move on. This is the map of the cave. Now, notice it has 4 levels. It's more or less segregated into 4 levels. I assume you can all see that fine. I know it's kind of small, but 5.5 miles is hard to put on one piece of paper. The blue passage is the stream passage. So the entrance is down there at the lower left. And if you look carefully, you can see there's a little triangular passage there. If you go in and make a right-hand turn, you go through the ear dip. And if you then immediately make a left-hand turn, you'll go back to the main passage. So out of the entrance pool, the left side is the brain dip, the right side is the ear dip. If instead of going upstream, you go downstream, that straight ahead passage sumped out, but that little right-hand passage at the end of the ear dip was a crawl around, and you came back into a room where the stream was running through it and headed down, and you walk on down the stream for, I don't know, 400 or 500 feet. I don't remember the exact mileage or footage. And actually, this map is a metric map. We did this all in metric. And so we've got 8.63 kilometers to this point, or 5.3 miles. If you go all the way down, you get a sump. You hit a sump, and it makes a right turn and heads out toward the hillside. I'll show you in the next slide. Well, I'm going to go ahead and do that. This is a topo map. Down where it says Cooksburg, is where the first field is. You can see the little dotted line. Can you all see that? Or is that too small?
I can
Anybody
see,
out there?
I can see it.
Okay. You see the little house, the barn in the house. The white square was a barn. The black house was a house. You went through a little dip and into a field that was a cornfield at the time. It was in corn. And then you go a little further through that field and you go through another dip, and there's another cornfield on the other side of that. The second dip is where the spring resurges, and that's right there by the D on Crooked, is where the spring comes out. All the water that goes through the cave, that whole big cave system, comes out right there by the top of that D. Um, and that then runs into Crooked Creek. What we're going in, if I go back, the entrance down here, you see my cursor?
Yes,
Yes.
Gary. Yes,
Okay, thank you. Here's the entrance. Right there, that is a karst window. Passage comes down here and the cave goes right by that karst window. It is an overflow. Anytime that spring cannot take the volume of water, like under heavy rains, it backs up and water just pours out that entrance. Now, that entrance is not even with the pool of water. The pool of water is about 5 or 6 feet lower than that entrance. The entrance is higher than Crooked Creek. The hillside, it's right in the hillside. Let me just move ahead here and show you some pictures. This is the second field. We park our car, and Jack Hissong is heading toward that second swale, that second dip that the water runs out of. The cave entrance is to the right of Jack. Well, he's not down in the, what you do is you walk down in the gully and make a right and walk up to the entrance. To the left is Crooked Creek. So let me go a little bit further. This is the way we went in initially to the cave. We would wear minimal clothes, and you would then take all the clothes you were going to use and double bag them in garbage bags and carefully carry them up with you up to the dressing room, which was about 1,800 feet up the cave. And then you were done being in and out of water, other than walking ankle deep in water. And so you could switch into all your dry clothes. So we would go in either, with bare chested like that, or we would wear a t-shirt. We learned eventually to just wear a t-shirt so the sand didn't irritate your skin, et cetera. And then have all your main caving clothes in the garbage bags. And that's the way I still do it when I go in Precinct 11. Some people wear wetsuits, and I can tell you that's a very bad idea because you will get hugely overheated in the rest of the cave. This is a nice, dry, great cave. The only wet part of it is the entrance and the first 1,000 feet or so. So we move on. When you're standing about where we were just sitting there a second ago, and you look down, this is what you see. The edge of the pool of water. That opening there is, well, let me move to the next one. There's Jack backing into the pool of water. The entrance is, if he were crawling out, he would be going up toward the entrance, but he's crawling into the cave backwards into the entrance pool of water. So you get an idea here of the size of the entrance pool. If I'm standing in the water taking the picture, if I turn around 180 degrees, you get this look. And this is the entrance pool I was talking about. If you look very carefully, you can see that mud slope on the other side of Jack that fooled us thinking that was the way into the cave, but it is not. The ear dip is to the right, and the brain dip would be behind Jack to the left. If you look at the ear dip to the right, there I am going into the ear dip. Now at this point, it's about a foot of airspace. But as you get further in, it gets down to 5.5 inches. All that being said, this is the disagreeable part of the cave right here getting in. Once you get up past that first 1,000 feet or so, you get into big passage. You do go in and out of some pools for a while until you get up to the dressing room, but the pools are like this. They're very, they're not that deep. You're hip deep, so sort of like Pine Hill, but you've got 12, 15 feet of ceiling above you. So it's pretty easy cave to negotiate. Along the way, you will pass a formation area. Nice draperies hanging on the left wall. That center triangular curtain is about 3.5 feet long. So it is a nice set of flowstone. As you go further up past that, there will be a ledge to your left. It is about 7 or 8 feet off of the floor where the pool is. So it's about head high, a little above head high. But there's a nice little easy climb up into this flat pancake room that's a ledge above, well above the water. And at this point, even under heavy flood, the water never gets up into this part of the cave, into this mezzanine room. And the thing that's interesting, besides some nice little stalactite formations, and some like this that are starting to balloon out, they're nice white formations. The really interesting thing is the area is covered with tracks, animal tracks. And that's just not any animal, it's a bear. It's bear prints. And this whole area is full of bear prints and bear wallows. This was a hibernaculum for the bears. This mezzanine area used to have an entrance at the far end of it, off to the left. You wind back around and there is a mud choke there now. But 20,000 years ago, and that's not my estimate, that came from a paleontologist up in from the University of Louisville, whose name I can't remember right now, but he's a caver. And he came down here, Ron Wilson, I think it was. And he's the one that looked at all this. And these wallows are undisturbed. What happened, as he explained it, is the overburden, the hillside, our earth is not stable. It's changing, it's dynamic. And there's the mud on the hillsides of all the hills in Kentucky. Every time it rains, some of that mud washes down the hill. And what happens over 20,000 years or so is that mud washes down, carrying with it any boulders that are around, and it backfills any entrance. So where it is now a mud choke, at one time, that was an open entrance to this part of the cave. So the bears could go in and out of here, and it was a nice hibernaculum, obviously, because there are, I'm just going to throw out a number because I don't remember, but there are probably 15 to 20 bear wallows in there. It was used regularly every winter. And there are those tracks like you just saw there, pretty good size. And the only thing in them, that dirt that gets blown around in the cave by the cave air, settles in the depressions and it builds up that little bit. Water has not touched this area since well before the bears were there. Since the bears, there have been no water in this passage. If you go further back to the right in this mezzanine room, there is a place where water does come in from above somewhere and runs across the floor and has cut a V-shaped trough in the mud, and then it runs down into the main stream behind it. and it's all muddy because there's a lot of mud fill in this room from when the cave was originally formed and the water level was up at this area, this level. Um, and so when the bears were walking around there in the dark, um, they would encounter that mud, that little dip there where the water was running across, and they'd step across it. And as they would, their claws would leave scratches down the side. So you've got prints with scratches from their claws. And honest to God, you go in there and look, you'll think they were made 6 months ago. But there hasn't been a bear in there for a long time. But that's the world of caves. Once you put a footprint in, just like they found in Wolf River Cave, where the Indians were in there, Native Americans, excuse me, how many, half a century ago, they were in there. Their footprints are the same as those bear prints. Got a little bit of dusty stuff in them, but they are undisturbed from when they were made. So this is an interesting find in the cave, obviously. We have found and looked hard. We have found an area in the upper level, 3 levels above, where there are more bear prints, but we have not found any bear bones, even though we looked. We found other animal bones, but as you do in most caves, but no bear bones. As you get further up toward the big room, you get into the Vedas passage. As you can tell, it's obviously the water has sculpted this over the millennia, and you're in big walking passage. Um, Made it easy. That's why we were able to get 9/10 of a mile. We were surveying through this kind of stuff. We had a lot of, in fact, you can see the tape there in front of me. We had a lot of shots that were full tape shots. We used a regular 30-meter, 100-foot fiberglass tape, silver compasses, as well as I knew I should have looked it up. The other compass. I used a Silver Ranger, but that was at the time that was state of the art. Some people did use Brunton compasses, but the Brunton compasses, though very accurate, are very hard to use because they're unsettling. You have to sit them on a tripod and let them settle for 5 minutes before you can read them. But at any rate, I'll say in advance, we were very careful. We used front sight and back sights with our compass shots. Same with our inclinometers, and there are a lot of loops in the cave. All of our loops were less than 0.5% closure error. So that qualifies, I believe, as a grade 5 survey. But you tell me, because I don't remember. So this was going up into the further reaches of the cave, still not up to the big room yet. But the interesting thing in this part of the cave is the chert, the amount of chert. This passage is about a 12-foot ceiling, and I'm taking a shot up toward it. You can see all the chert in it. In the next shot, Jack Hissong is using his Silver Ranger. If you look up on the wall above him, to the back, to the right, you see that big black rock? That is a big piece of chert. There are places in this part of the cave where, and sort of see it underneath it, there are like logs. You think there's black logs sticking out of the wall, and they are chert nodules that are, some of them are 8 or 9 inches in diameter. And because silicate rock is much harder than the limestone, they are in relief now, sticking out. And some of those things stick out 18 inches from the wall. It's very impressive. I was impressed, but So let's go back to the entrance, get a better picture here of the entrance pool. Notice those ceiling heights, they are in meters, not feet. The ear dip is the one to the right. And if you continue straight out the ear dip, you'll go into that sump that is heading downstream. If you make a right turn, you will go around the crawl around and go further downstream come back into a nice room where you find it's got a flat rock floor for about 20 feet. And that flat rock floor is the thing that determines the water level in the entrance pool. We were hoping you could go down there and dig out the floor a little bit and get more airspace in the entrance pool. Not going to happen. If you want to dig it out, you better bring yourself a hammer, a sled. What do you call it? I'm losing it. Sorry. You better bring a rock hammer or a rock jackhammer. Jeez. Because that's what's going to take. It's solid rock floor, and even when the water stops, then the water in the entrance pool by evaporation may give you a little more airspace, but the water very seldom stops. It's draining that whole Barnett Valley, and even in drought periods, right now there might not be much water coming down that stream passage, but it's very seldom where there is no water. I can't ever say in any of our trips in even the summer did I ever see that stream dry. So as long as there's any water coming down there, you're going to get that 5 inches, 5.5 inches of airspace, because the pool level is determined by that rock floor down there about where you see that 2 in the circle, or that 3 right in between there. That's that room that has the solid rock floor. And as you go all the way down, I wanted to point this out, and you make that right turn where it says sump and it has a 1, it does sump out. And if you look to the left of that, spring resurgence, that is the hillside, that line, and the arrow is pointing to that spring resurgence when you come out of the first field and drive through that little dip. There's always water in that bottom of that dip, and that's what's coming out of that sump. But you can't say, well, dig it out. No, it's rock, layers of rock, and you've got like an inch or 2 space between it where the water is coming out. Under periods of heavy rain, the water can't get out through that hole fast enough, or those holes, and so that's when it backs up into the main passage. However, even during the impoundment when we were stuck in there, the water never got much up beyond where you see that cross section line. You're a few hundred feet from the, you weren't even that far, because when we were impounded, we went down to the entrance. We went to the far end of the ear dip, and we were at the end of the brain dip, where I left the note on that Monday when we talk about the rescue, was right there between those 2 ones, right at the end of the brain dip, right at the end of that triangular place, is where I left it on the sandy beach there. So even with all the water that was impounding and closing off the air spaces on both sides, that was still negotiable through all of that, all the way up to where we were. So there's no danger of you being drowned in Precinct 11. The only thing that really gets impounded are the ear dip and the brain dip. Okay, so what we eventually did, let me go back one step, up about where you see the yellow, that's an upper level on this, up at the very top of the picture. Right down below that in the stream passage, the blue passage, we established the dressing room. All this area in between, you're in and out of pools of water. We would go all the way through in our shorts and t-shirts and whatever, until we got up to the dressing room. And that's the dressing room. The stream is off to the left, but it's high and dry. The water never got up onto that sloping rock. It got up about where Jack's feet are while we were impounded. But if you go up straight ahead where Gary Taylor is, and you go up, climb up to the upper level, you enter a mezzanine area that has nice soft dirt. And that's where we spent 72 hours when we were impounded, because it looks down over the main passage. And if anybody came up the passage, we could see them. So it was a perfect place that got nicknamed Survival City, but that's where we stayed and waited for people to come in. Um, and what we did do is put a siloom up in the mud up there that lit up this whole part of the passage. And the first people that did enter it, the first divers, Steve Hudson and his friend, um, they saw that siloom and then they knew where we were. Okay, let's move on. If you go up there by Survival City, up on that mezzanine and crawl to the back edge of it, you crawl up this slot and continue up. This is a bigger area. It doesn't look that big, but this is. It's probably 8 feet from down at the bottom up to the ceiling. And off to the left, the passage continues up and you pop out in the upper trunk. You see Jack Hillsong sitting right, it's my cursor. There's Jack Hillsong. Somebody else down here. This is a 40-foot high passage. This is the upper trunk of Precinct 11. Hasn't seen water in a million years, probably. It's high and dry. Survival City was down below here, and you go down the hole, and where you pop out is right about here. You go right down there. So anytime we got cold or tired, we'd just walk up here and hike along this trail that's up in this area. So it was very comfortable. If you got to be stuck in a cave, it was a great place to be. Okay. Now, survey trips. This is what we're here to talk about. You can see the first day, June 22nd, that we went in, we got 1.4 kilometers. We came back 2 weeks later for a weekend, the 5th and 6th of July. We got 900 meters and 300 meters. So we got another 1.2 meters that weekend. So by the end of that second weekend, we had 1.6 miles to the cave. Nice, easy survey. We had essentially 20 survey trips from 80 to 85. You can see down there, 84, there were some small trips. 83, there were only a couple of trips. 82 only had 4 or 5 trips. 81 only had 1 trip. And 1980 is when we had most of our survey. And we, at the end of 1980, we had 3.25 miles in the cave. And that was most of the bigger passage. And then we were doing smaller passages up in the upper levels. And you wouldn't, because they twist and turn a lot, like most caves, you don't get a lot of mileage when you're surveying. Though we did, you see that one, we got 600 meters. Okay, that's more than half a kilometer. That's half a mile. And the last survey we did was in the dead meat section. Mark Rockland and some of his friends went in and they got 17 meters. And that was the last survey that we did. And there are no significant going leads. There are little holes here and there, but I know there is more passage in that cave. If you look at where it sits on the ridge, do I still have it? I mean, the dead meat section is right there on the very far upper tip. That's where they ended the survey. And if you come through the big room, which is right here, which has got big domes on either side of it, and you crawl on the stream, this gets very low. You see the question marks. That's going. You've got air blowing in your face. That's where the main water comes out for the stream passage, the main drainage from Barnett Valley. The problem is it's not human size. The ceiling, it's all solid rock, and the passage is 4 inches high, 3 inches high. you can't, a human being can't get through there. But we found a way around it, and that was out of the big room, behind the three-corner hat domes, which are right here. There's a climb up into what we call Alligator Alley, and you walk along there. It's at a much higher level, probably 20 feet higher than this passage here. And then it drops down into another low level. And then you climb up again into some upper passages and over some rock and back down into the low stream level. But it's a big flat room where you have impounded water to most of it, but it is slowly seeping through there because it's part of the main drainage that's you see coming out here. So the main stream is not in these passages. This is backfill water. The main stream probably runs over here somewhere. This is at stream level because of the pooling of the water. There are mud chokes back here that probably lead to an entrance, but how much mud do you have to dig before you get out? We have never radio located in this cave. That would be a next step if that's what you wanted to try and get a back entrance, all in these upper level passages. And see over here, these green in the green level, those all end in mud chokes. And what we did find was out in Barnett Valley, which is out here, this Barnett Valley, we found Hopeful Cave, found a nice pit cave. We climbed down to the bottom of it. And at the bottom, there was a low crawlway in solid rock, not human size, but you could stick your head in and you could, if you did, you could just about get your face in this tube and it's blowing air in your face like crazy. And I know it connects into P11 because here's Hopeful Cave. See that little X right there? And there's a crawl around passage right here. And I'm sure that connects pneumatically into Hopeful Cave. But again, solid rock, no human size entrance. So what more can I say about surveying? As I said before, we're very careful in all our surveys. If we got anything more than 0.5% of survey closure on a loop, we went back and resurveyed those loops. But we were using front sight and back sights, and we were pretty diligent about making sure that we matched our azimuth readings, the same as we did with our altimeter readings, with our inclination readings. And then that was it. It was a good cave to survey. We had a lot of interested people that went on it. Jack and I and Dennis Green were on just about every survey trip. I think I missed one or two, and all of us except Mark Rockland missed that very last one where they got 17 meters. They did that on a whim, sort of. They wanted to check out what they thought were some leads, and they turned out obviously not to be much. But as you go through those big, huge passages, we didn't climb up, that main passage where you got a 40-foot ceiling. There are ledges up there that you can't free climb up to. Just the development of that cave with the multi-level, let me go back. If you go look and see the multi-level, I mean, right here you've got a high upper level that is the highest level in the cave, and that is a huge trunk passage. It's just like the one that was over here. That trunk passage you saw where Jack was sitting on the edge, that's it right there. So look at the size of that. As near as possible, I made these as accurate as possible as far as size. Look at the size of that trunk and look at the size of this trunk. This is big trunk. And it's actually, you get at it, it ends in a mud choke, or actually it's not ending, but it's a high passage up by the ceiling, or there's a mud fill right in, damn it, where am I? Right there. And you're right up against the ceiling, and you've only got about a 2-inch, 3-inch airspace. And there as they are moving. So if you go back down here, go down to a level and come over here and climb up to this other extension of this, I'm sure it's an extension of the same trunk. It's at the same elevation. And this here again is a mud choke. You're on the other side of that mud choke. But again, there's a mud choke over here that's pointing out this way in toward the hillside. That if you were to radio locate some of these, you might be able from the outside to be able to dig your way into the cave. But there are advantages and disadvantages to doing that. Oh, and we do find bats in the cave, all the way back in some of these areas. Now the bats, and I know for a fact, had been there in the brain dip and the ear dip in the evening, the bats are flying in and out of the cave through there. So they go into this cave, whether the same bats we find up here came in this entrance or they've got another entrance somewhere in the upper ceiling areas of these passages, I don't know. But bats do get in there. We've never found any huge clusters of bats. They're mainly solitaries, but they are throughout the cave. You find them in different places, except not down here in these lower levels here, not in the dead meat section. Haven't found any back there. So it was an interesting cave to go through. It is still a beautiful cave. And that's one reason why you might not want to echolocate an entrance. Yeah, avoid the brain dip and the ear dip, but those are the filters that keep the cave pristine. Other people have been coming down and going in the cave. And the last time I was in the cave was about 4 years ago at Spelia Fest. Took a group in. I didn't see any destruction to the cave. No graffiti, no nothing, even in the obvious areas. So that's Precinct 11. Any questions about the surveying?
No, no questions on the survey from me. Does anybody else have any questions about the survey?
Survey-ish. This is Dana. Survey-ish.
Yeah.
First, Gary, thank you for the presentation. Really enjoyed it. Could you bring up the picture of the topo overlaid with this cave map, please?
Sure. We go back to the entrance. Oops. That's right here.
Awesome. Thank you. So Gary Odell put on a presentation for Doug a couple months back, and his theory. I don't know if he was in on that or not, but it's a presentation.
Well, he got the data from me.
Okay. Yeah. So it's a big valley like this with a huge cave system on one side has the probability of having another monstrous cave on the opposite side. So has there been any work done on that opposite side of Barnett Valley?
You see all these little valleys running up here off of the bottom of Barnett Valley. We poked and prodded through that whole area because obviously we had the same thought that the development, and just as happens at Great Saltpeter, you've got Great Saltpeter Cave on the one side of Crooked Creek. On the other side, you've got Hard Baker Cave with a big trunk passage at the same level. And the Crooked Creek bisected that cave passage. So you've got it on both sides. So, my thought is that most of the hills in this part of Kentucky and south of there are hollow. They all have cave passage. The question is, how many of them have cave passage that has a human entrance out to the surface? And that's the problem. There is probably cave passage all through this area as there is here. If you look at the topo, this is only a third of Barnett Valley. It goes up twice as far as you see there, up to the northeast from here. And this cave passage probably continues up further out of here. And yeah, there's probably cave passage over here. We have not been able to find anything on that side. We found a few little holes, but that's exactly what they were. Very short 100-foot cave or something like that. They were in, you know, this is elevation wise, this is the floor of this, the lower level of Precinct 11 is, at least down here, is probably at the same level as the stream is here. Maybe a little bit lower, because all the water that comes down here, there's a cave, and I don't remember where it is. Let's see, where was Hopeful? Hopeful was in this part. It was up about here. There is a hole in the valley, and we thought, oh, well, this is the way into Precinct 11. We went down, we were in a pool of water, and it sumped. Everything out of that pool of water sumped. But I'm sure hydrologically, it connected with this passage over here. We thought we could get into that cave, but we couldn't. And that was that was the most interesting lead that we found in the valley. On this side, never did find anything interesting that even looked like it went into Big Cave. Now, does that mean there's not one there? Of course not. You know, we're human. We walked the hillside. That doesn't mean we didn't walk right by some crack that you could dig out and find a cave. You know, Bob Dobbs Cave and a whole bunch of other caves.